far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman, woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees.
Welcome to this episode of the 100 ABC Women Fireside Chats. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the topic of poverty and homelessness and finding creative solution, especially around our children and our youth. Before we get started, some startling statistics. Less than 4% of homeless people in Canada are 65 years or older. 62% of people using shelters are male. Men aged between 25 and 55 account for 47.5% of all Canadians experiencing homelessness. Women account for 27.3% of people experiencing homelessness and have an increased risk of being in hidden homelessness. These are statistics from January 5th and from Statistics Canada. So we are very pleased to have a distinguished panel of seasoned professionals who really can speak to this topic, and I'll just introduce them. First, we have Vera Herlock. She's a retired registered nurse, an ordained elder at Ruth Seventh-day Adventist Church. She's worked as a registered nurse at one of the largest hospitals in Toronto for over 30 years. She was a nursing preceptor for over 15 years. She taught supervised nursing students from different colleges and universities. And she's a longtime member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And in that capacity, she has served in many areas, including Pathfinders and Adventures, which offer children and youth clubs. And she also initiated the first vacation Bible school and Children's Day. Welcome, Vera. Next, we have Janelle Skerritt. She's co-owner of Adinkra Farm, and she's CEO of York Region Children's Aid Society. And as a community service leader, she has been an anti-poverty advocate, overseeing multiple programs related to poverty, hunger, and homelessness. And she's opened Scarborough's first homeless respite, funded by the City of Toronto, and that was in 2018. Last but not least, we have Allison Williams. She has over 30 years dedicated to social work, and she's been advocating for families and individuals, empowering them to overcome the challenges of homelessness and poverty. And since July 2023, her work has extended to helping recent asylum seekers in Canada, addressing the intersectionality of displacement and economic hardship, and providing essential support to rebuild lives. Grounded in a commitment to social justice, she strives to make a lasting impact on those facing the complex issues of homelessness and poverty, fostering resilience and positive change. Welcome to all of you. Now, to sort of center our conversation, I'd like us to talk about definitions, because society has one definition of poverty, the government has another one, economic institutions have another one, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to ask each of you to talk about what is homelessness. Is there only one kind of homelessness? What are the different kinds of homelessness? Who would like to start?
I'll go first.
Okay.
Thank you for having me on. My name is Vera, and homelessness. When I thought of homelessness, I just think you don't have a home to go to. In looking at this topic, I've discovered there are different types of homelessness. Now, in almost every city, you will find people sleeping on the streets. They sleep on park benches, and it affects ages, sexes, races, backgrounds, and is among the most obvious examples of poverty, prejudice, and inequality. Sometimes too, mental illness is there along with it. However, homelessness is often, or absolute homelessness is often thought of as just living in a shelter or a completely unhoused encampment. Now, this kind of homelessness in Canada is referred to as absolute homelessness, and it is shared by the statistics say by 2.2% of households at some point in their lives. There are, however, many more Canadians, 10.5%, who have experienced hidden homelessness. So what's hidden homelessness? Well, sometimes people don't have their own home, and they drop by a friend and they stay by this friend. And then they move on to another friend. They're just looking somewhere to sleep, right? They don't have anything to call their own. And we also have them riding on public transportation because maybe it's cold, they want to get warm. They sleep on park benches. They sit in fast food joints for very long periods. I used to think that because you don't have a job that you're homeless, but I've discovered that you can have a job and still be homeless. because many people in the literature, it says that they have a job, but because of the economy, they are not making enough money to pay for an apartment and they can't buy a house. So they end up being homeless. Now, hidden homelessness also have got to do with if you're moving and you're relocating and you go to another city, the place where you're going to live is not ready yet. So you have to go and live with someone because of that. And also sometimes when you in hidden homelessness, you are just staying with a family or a friend for long periods. So you can either be dropping in and going the next day, or you stay for long periods until they maybe get tired of you and tell you you have to move on.
Okay, so Vera, let's
Yeah,
let's just go over to Janelle.
yeah.
You can expand on some of what Vera has said about the different categories of homelessness, and then we can talk about what you see with youth in care, because that is your field.
Right. So what I would say is I concur that hidden homelessness is often misunderstood as homelessness. And many times I recall running the respite or when I used to do food programs, people would drive up in fancy cars and have nowhere to actually live or not have enough food. So poverty and homelessness are linked, of course, right?
Mm.
And it is a very real issue. What is emerging, though, is that link is blurred a little bit these days because the affordability and availability of affordable housing is so threatened that even when people are working, even when people are able to afford, they cannot find housing. So they end up in the same position of being essentially people living without homes. So I concur that homelessness really has many more dimensions than we think about when we first look at the issue. And to understand all of it has to do with breaking down precarious employment, precarious housing, because I would argue that if you're on the verge of losing your housing every month, you're in this category of being people without a real home, right? So
Thanks,
that's how I
thanks
would
for
see it.
that, Janelle.
No problem.
Thanks, Allison.
Yeah, I would just concur what Janelle said and Vera said about all the different aspects. Was when we think about housing, we think about it from one lens, but when you understand in the context of what's been experienced and seen on the streets, it comes from many different ways, from the intersection of what Vera alluded to, where they're in between housings, to couch surfing, the issue around age, the issue around why people choose to be homeless in order to protect and remain safe. And so there's just, when we think about homeless and we think about in the context of what's happening, we have to remember that often it's not by choice. It's layered. It's not just that they're homeless. There are many facets. There's many stories behind it. And so when we think about homelessness, we have to think about people in need.
Mm-hmm. Janelle, did you have something you wanted to add?
I did because just thinking about what has been noticed is that when we were looking at homelessness before, the stats were showing that it's mostly single males, and increasingly it's families, whole families becoming homeless. It's women with children becoming homeless, and there's just something very different about how homelessness has transformed within the last 10 years or so to a lot of refugees that we are seeing, but those could be men or women, young men or young women, and so that's been an interesting trend. Also, we're noticing that people who the healthcare system has failed end up being precariously housed or homeless because they cannot get the care that they need and they fall off, or there are lots of addiction related issues to the opioids and to pain killing drugs. I'm seeing the head shaking, Allison, so I know you identify with what I'm saying. But that is what we sadly saw. And so, transitioning to work in child welfare from community services, I'm also seeing that there are many, many young people who are displaced by family conflict, and they end up being in need of a place to stay. And so we are seeing, we support youth from 15 up to the age of 23 in many cases, for different programs at child welfare. And I'm happy to talk about that side of child welfare, because I know we have a reputation that just has to do with taking children away from families, especially in our communities. But I was actually delighted to learn about all of the work that we do, bridging those gaps for children and youth who are genuinely precariously housed or homeless due to displacement from family conflict in particular.
So Janelle, later in the conversation, we will focus on that when we're talking about the creative solutions, with around children and youth and poverty and homelessness. Vera, you are a retired nurse.
Yes.
Janelle did highlight, the health related issues that contribute to homelessness. What did you see in your practice when you were still in nursing?
I did work a lot in surgery though, cancer surgery, but in nursing overall, you find we've had homeless people on the floor, and that's because we have drug addictions, right? And the individual has not much education, so they're not working, and they just go about on the streets from one day to the next, and they might drop into the Salvation Army to get meals, or they go into a shelter to sleep, but they really have no plan for their lives. And I think some of that is caused by mental issues. They have mental problems, and sometimes they're treated with psychiatric drugs. But then when they leave there, they go back to the same thing. And I remember one night, this person he was staying in a shelter, and he left his prescription. And I finished work, because I used to work 12-hour shift, and I finished work and I said, I got to go and give it to him. He needs his prescription. And I didn't know where the place was. It was downtown Toronto, and I was driving around, and I saw a police car, and just to see how people look down on those who are homeless. I walked up to the police and I said, could you help me? I'm looking for the Salvation Army hostel. And he answered me in a very derogatory manner. I think he thought that I wanted to go to one. When he changed his demeanor, when I held up the prescription, I said, and I am a nurse from such and such a hospital. I looked after this person. I want to give him this prescription. Then his demeanor completely changed, and he said, follow the police car. So these people are marginalized in society. They are looked down on. They're discriminated against. And because of that, they can't get ahead, because it would seem as if there is no care. Nobody cares, So in nursing, we've run across people like that, and many of them are over on the psychiatric ward, and just drugs they're getting all the time.
Thanks for that, Vera. And it's very important to also have a small discussion about the way society treats, the unhoused or poorly housed people. But before we get to that, Allison, because Janelle did bring up the issue of, asylum seekers and refugees. And Allison, since you've had recent experience with that demographic, what can you tell us about what homelessness looks like for them?
Wow, that's kind of a big subject to talk about. I'm going to try and condense it and just speak to what does homeless look like for our refugees and our asylum seekers. It looks bleak. One of the things is that I want to dispel a myth. A lot of our refugees and our asylum seekers that have been coming through, they have resources, they have education, because there's there's a thing out there, they don't have education and they don't have money. But often what came through the door was, we are sleeping on the street because when we phone those houses, we come from the wrong country. The first thing they ask us, what country do we come from? And say, we don't want people like you in our homes. And so they are forced. We haven't touched on that, but I'm sure that you all understand that some people, or another dimension is that some people are forced to be homeless because there's nowhere to house them, even if they have the resources. One of the things is that we, as a society, as Canada, we already had a homeless issue. And so trying to house people where we are like most shelters were 150 to 270 over capacity daily. And so some of the things that I could talk to you about, the grace of the manager of that hostel opening the door at night so they could sleep in the hallways, that there was some real amazing stories about the graceness of people. But what I can tell you is that these people do not have access to the things that we think they should have, and that they are seen as less than, based on the fact that they have a refugee or asylum seekers attached to them, who they are. And there was this thing that I was listening to the other day about just being a number and not recognized as a person.
Yeah.
So even though, sorry, Sarah.
No, removing the humanity of that population.
100%. And one of the things is that in terms of them being housed temporarily was often because they didn't have access to housing, not financial, but physically no access. The second thing is that, unfortunately, the same systems that were there to protect them has been actually the things that have caused many issues and reasons where people have left the hotels in order to sleep outside because they feel safer, or they feel that their dignity was taken away from them because they were in the hotels. And so based on the setup of those systems that were put in place to protect them were actually things that impacted them mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And so although there has been a push to address the issue, I think one of the things that Gwyneth Chapman has talked about is that we trying to change that narrative story around the way in which society sees people who have come into this country for refuge, for whatever reason.
And interestingly, some of the people that I've heard or seen complaining, their ancestors very often came in waves of migration seeking refuge from conflict elsewhere, from starvation, etc., etc. Janelle, let's talk about Vera very rightly brought up the issue of marginalization. How does that express itself in your field in terms of your homeless clients?
Well, basically, landlords don't want to rent to children in care, to youth who've been in care. There's a stigmatization of the population that is a problem there. So we try to develop relationships with people who are working in the housing, in emergency housing and so on. But even so, emergency housing is not necessarily available, because as the homelessness issue becomes more chronic and and pervasive in the society, there's just not emergency beds available either. So this leaves populations that are marginalized, and remember, we're dealing with a disproportionate number of Black children in care as well. And so when you are racialized, you're 2S LGBTQ, you have a history of trauma, you probably are not coping with life very well, generally speaking, there's a stigmatization. You're not going to be the first pick of people who have available housing, right? So anyway, so we're going to talk about some solutions afterwards, but that really is what is magnifying the issue as we're experiencing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the intersectionality between race and economic status. We didn't really talk about poverty, like how poverty is defined. I recently was home in Africa, and poverty over there, it expresses itself differently from the way it does here in Canada. How would you define poverty, or what do you know about what is defined as poverty, economic poverty in Canada?
Well, I think it's interesting that you opened with that, Sarah, because I find that when we go to our home countries, I was born in a place and growing up in a place where today is one of the most impoverished areas. It was always a poor area, right? And however, when you're in Africa, the Caribbean, you can grow food most of the year. So there are different things you can do to cope with and alleviate poverty. Plus, the society is more collective oriented, more so I could tell you stories upon stories of people who grew up with aunties and uncles that are not blood relatives, right? And they ate and they took care of. And I was raised by my grandmother, and she taught me how to cook. And one of the things that shows that you always have enough in the pot for somebody who might come by. So these kinds of traditions and ways that we lived in village communities or in communities that were practicing our culture together, those kinds of things help to temper the impact of the economic realities because we share. I remember talking about when I also run a susu as one of the things that I do, or partner box, collect ROSCA, Rotating Savings and Credit Association. And I remember a story about, well, it wasn't just food that money that we shared. We also shared food. Because if there was somebody down the hill who catch fish, somebody up the hill who grow yam, and someone who had rice and other provisions, that would be a meal we would all share as a community. So though that kind of communal living and those kinds of thoughts and ways of being impact the way we experience poverty differently. But here that's my experience with it. Here in Canada, the society is encouraged to be individualistic. Even when we come here, we think we're coming to the land of milk and honey. So you're not as likely to call up your neighbors and say, or your friends in your community and say, you know what, I don't have any meat today. I don't have any juice today. I don't have any milk today. I don't have eggs today. And so there is a stigma attached to that, and it's very unique to here. Also, people have the attitude that, hey, you have all the opportunity, you just go out, pull yourselves up by the bootstraps type of thing. And so that mentality and that way that society treats things here is an adjustment. And the impact of racism and systems on people who are experiencing these things even intensifies that
Yeah.
separation and that individual mindset that we have.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Janelle. Vera,
Yes.
you, in an earlier conversation, you told me about the fact that your church, for example, because of the economic situation and increased uh, economic hardship and poverty, uh, you have a food bank in
Yes.
your church. So
Yes.
how what does poverty look like from your point of view as a member of a church that serves users of the food bank?
Yes, there are people out there, because of the disparity between groups. There are people out there who have no food or no access to proper education, and so they can't get a good job. So economic wise, they don't have the money And so what the food bank does, we get support from huge supermarkets, and we distribute the food. We have a time the last Sunday of every month. People can go and they can contact before, because I have noticed that sometimes when some of them come, they already have the bag is already packed with the groceries for them. So they know where to contact. The information goes out, but they come and they get their groceries, whatever they need, because the church members also contribute. So we have Easter, you have Christmas, and you know you're going to get your Christmas basket with a turkey. You're going to get your Easter basket also, because we have in the church Sabbath school classes. And in these Sabbath school classes, we are given a list. These are the items that you need to contribute to the food bank, because we have to keep the shelves stocked. And so the members of the class bring in the items, and then those are some of the stuff that is distributed. Just in case the supermarket didn't supply some of them, we always have a lot on stock. We have rice, we have sugar, we have meat, we have flour, we have everything except the fruits. The perishable items we don't have. There are
But
more
Vera,
yeah.
so are you saying that there's a partnership between a grocery store and
Yeah.
the church
Yes.
to
Yes.
stock this food bank?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. There's a partnership, because remember, when when the supermarket has food, they have dates that are coming up where the food would expire, but at the same time they're getting a new stuff. So the new stuff comes in before the old stuff there is expired. So they get them out and they send them to the churches. We get lots of stuff, and there was a time we also get furniture, you know, and that we can give to people. Do you need a couch? Do you need a sofa? Do you need a dining room table that we can give? Also, we also give clothing. As people give clothing, and some of them are new, and we give them away. But yes, there is a partnership there. But we look at all, if anything that expired, we remove it. But we get lots of food that are not expired, and people can come and get the food. That's not all that we do, though. I was mentioning before that children going back to school, we give them care packs. We also have we have a lot of colleges and universities. That's our organization. And if the church give you X amount of dollars, we have universities that will do a matching. If you go to an Adventist school, they give you a scholarship to go to an Adventist university or college. That's how we help our people there. And whether you're Adventist or not, and you go into an Adventist school, and when you graduate, these colleges come down, some from the US. We have one over there in Canada called Berman. They come down and they give, they say, we have a scholarship for you. They look at your grades and they will give you a scholarship. And that
Yeah.
helps school.
Okay.
We also have a program where you can work. They give you a job and you can work, and they use it to help pay your school fees so you can educate yourself.
Okay, so there's different types of
Yeah.
help that the SDA community
Yeah.
does offer. But let's get back to the conversation around how poverty and homelessness is experienced by children and young people, and what that does. Because I forget, I think it was it Vera who was talking about there's more and more families now with children. We haven't heard from Allison in a while, so let's hear from Allison what you see
Okay.
in your work.
I want to share that, the opportunity for me to actually see another level of poverty. And I just want to clarify that poverty and being poor are two different things. That poverty is when you haven't got enough financial resources to meet the needs of you or your children, that you can't, the hierarchy of need, you can't sustain a roof over your head, you can't get nourishment and stuff like that. And so, but one of the things that I don't know if you're aware, but a lot of that we have quite a number of refugees that come in, women who come in pregnant. And so one of the things that I've been instrumental is being in the rooms while they're laboring, and also being part of transitioning them into a family shelter. And the amount of families, when I talk about 150, 170, 250 overcapacity capacity in those shelters, well, double it or maybe triple it for the families ones. And you see rooms that are no bigger than, I don't know, a small kitchen, and that they're living with 3 or 4 children in there. And so as you walk in there, you see children all in the hallway, trying to do homework, trying to be fed, while parents are kind of trying to figure stuff out. And I think that that level of poverty starts to inroad and impact the actual development of children. And I think that when we think about that, but we don't think about the other things, because what often I had to do was go into the rooms and sit and talk to families about wellness and about the practicalities of caring for their baby while cockroaches ran around me, and having to walk out there and leave them in that place that was not only unhealthy, but it felt that it was in lots of ways a concern, because there were some rodents running around amongst those children and everything. So I'm just saying that because I'm bringing the light of that. When we talk about poverty, we have to think about poverty being a physical thing, but actually it's a mental thing. It's a spiritual thing, because they have to endure so much in order to try and come out of that shelter or that homeless situation that they're in. And often they come with their own story of trauma.
Yeah. Janelle, I saw you agreeing, and maybe you wanted
Most,
to add something.
yeah, most definitely. I wanted to add the idea I spoke about before, the healthcare system. Well, there is another system that comes to bear, and it particularly affects the population of Black youth, because we have such high numbers of incarcerated children in youth and children. I would say, if they're getting younger, in the justice system and interacting with the justice system. They don't come out of that experience and have stable housing. They come out of that experience sometimes to their family rejecting them. Sometimes they don't want to be in the community with their families. And when they're released, there's not a lot of support once you're released from incarceration. Sometimes after years of being separated from your family, and if you're a father, because it is mostly males we're talking about, you might not even have met your children, and so on. So you're kind of displaced and disoriented, and you end up being in the homeless population, or looking for housing, precariously housed, or can't find any housing. So I think that one of the important things, the dimensions that we often don't talk about, because we talk about just fixing the immediate problem, is how these systems can be changed, or are playing a role. So is it the health? What happens when someone is released in healthcare or has a chronic illness in healthcare? What does that do to their ability to earn an income? So then there's the employment, then there's the system of welfare and ODSP, all of those things working together to create an interesting mix. So we have to find solutions that address each of those systems, I think. Yeah.
Allison?
I just wanted to say, Janelle, just this idea about that youth that you're talking about who are coming out of prison, and the impact of being a feeling of a sense of abandonment with all the other things that are happening to them. And one of the things I was exposed to was again around Black youth who are on the streets. We know that we make up 3% of the Canadian population, but yet we are overrepresented in not only in all those institutions, including homeless, overrepresented. And I just felt called to just say, like, to acknowledge that these young men our unmet need is loss. Most of them have lost someone to the streets, to be incarcerated. That could be dad, brother, uncle, friend. All these things have, all these intersectionalities that we don't talk about impact their lack of trust of systems. And then it goes to about trying to, as you were saying, Janelle, trying to find places that they can feel safe and feel that they can accommodate them, accommodate their needs, although they can feel supported. And I think that, again, when we think about homeless and we think about poverty, we know that they're one of the same. And we come from a generation where we know that the community doesn't have the foundation it needs to support the community. And I just want to just digress and say, I remember listening to the deputy minister, and she was saying that, you know, when they were bringing in a certain amount of refugees from another country and they were giving them all the support, and the first set they did really well because they went to families, they went to communities that held them. And when the second came in, they've done less. They ended up in those systems of health and homelessness, because the fabric of our community is so powerful. And I think you, Sarah, you and Janelle, you talked about that earlier around how different culturally we live in terms of a lack of connection, that we're so individualized. And I just want to say one more thing about going back to when you were talking about, you cannot knock the door and say, I need, I haven't got enough money for food today, or could you borrow me some rice, because you instinctively believe you're going to be judged, and because people believe you should be able to go into the community and find that money. You should be able to go get a job. You should be able to sell something. You should be able to do, you shouldn't be coming to me, because if I can do it, you can do it. And we have that mentality. Anyway, thank you.
And do you think that mentality comes as a result of ignorance about how Janelle very well described, you know, sort of the systemic impoverishment and marginalization of these young Black men? Is it because we're ignorant about how these systems work against certain communities?
I think it is, but I think we have this other thing that's going on, which is scarcity, and that we feel that we cannot lean in or support others because we've just got enough, and we have to make sure we hold on to it. We come from a generation like that we feel that we have to look after our own space. We have what we have belongs to us because we've worked hard for it, and that you can do it if I can do it mentality. And I think it is systemic in nature. It is a narrative, that a story that we kind of has been replayed by, not just by what we hear in our homes or in our communities, but our subliminary messages that impact and reinforce that narrative that we should keep what belongs to us. And if you want something, anything like that, you need to go and find it yourself. And so, yeah, I find that this idea around how we are emerging as a community, and there is so much want for people to help, but people are struggling to just hold on to what they have. And so somehow that scarcity mentality comes into it, and so we don't help even when we feel we should.
So, oh, Janelle, sorry.
Yeah, may I say that many times I think we tend to personalize it. And that's why I'm encouraging us to have a systems analysis, because we live in a situation where there is purposeful disenfranchisement. The disproportionality is not happening by mistake. There is our foundations as a society are structured in such a way that it creates a disadvantage for some, right? And this is not to take away the idea of personal responsibility, and because we're all relatively successful people. We know that it's possible. Our greatness can't be completely capped, right? But when you have systems that are operating that have things like the rate of incarceration of Black men, and now a growing situation with Black women, the rate of poverty that we experience as a Black community. And then we can link that directly to policies and practices that exist in the society. So you have to have that systems analysis in order to really understand it, and not bring to bear some of the things that Allison was talking about, or be able to look beyond that and say, oh, it's not that just that family has a blight. You know, you
Right.
hear these things, we talk about these
Yeah.
things in this way, like, and then, you know, don't get me started on those things, but I think that we need to have an analysis that understands that we're not operating. You know, those old equity trainings that they had,
Yeah.
where they show you the starting line, and Black people are starting from behind here, and other people have privilege and advantage. I think we forget that the cause of that is not because Black people wanted to stay back, right? It is because of systems and ways that tell us a little bit, and the gradual dehumanization of our experiences. So this all works together to create the outcomes and the symptoms that we're really talking about. And so that, I just wanted to mention that it does impact the way we think about ourselves as well.
So since we're going to be talking about children and youth, the one person, Allison, mentioned homework in school. So children and youth in living in poverty and homeless, and the school system, what have you seen? Vera, do you have any experience of that, or?
Well, one of the things I was just looking at here in the paper before me is the indigenous community, because that has not been mentioned. And a lot of problems with education and poverty is way up in the indigenous community. Our conference has a program that is up there, and we've sent a lot of stuff there. They don't even have say a good runway where or where trucks can drive up and go into the community. They don't have that. And so
Vera, when you say up there, do you mean up north,
I'm
in northern
talking up
Canada?
north, up northern Canada.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at indigenous households, 29.5% were almost 3 times as likely to have experienced some form of homelessness. And you know, as we know, homeless and poverty kind of go together when you compare it to the total population. And even the immigrants, we are down at 8.3%. And a lot of the indigenous people are people who are here long before us. So I am thinking, I would have liked us to touch on it. Why is it that there is so much poverty up there? Why is there so much mental problem? Why there's so much alcoholism up there? And the people are those indigenous people are not living a good life. And our organization has gone up there. They had to get a plane to drop in food and clothing and all sort of other stuff that they need because of the situation up there. So, and the reason I bring that up because the literature said there's a disparity between groups of people, and indigenous is at the head there with 29.5%, and other population is 9.5%, and then immigrants 8.3%. The other thing that concerns me about what I think is Janelle was talking about, and Allison, about our Black community. Has any analysis ever been done to find out why is it so much of our Black young youth are involved in crime? Anyone have that answer there? Because it's something that I think about, and what can we do? Because we need to get, you see what we're doing? Many times we go out there and we help and we put in a Band-Aid on the problem, right?
Yeah.
It's like when you're in nursing, you're treating the symptom, but not the cause of the illness. We need to treat the cause, and until we treat the cause, because all of us here, we are Black, and we are interested in everybody who is in poverty, everybody who is homeless, but we especially have an invested interest in our own people, because I think they are suffering a lot. As you said, they make up, we are only 3% of the society, yet we have a high percentage in prison. And so many of them come out, lack of education, right? They don't go to school, they'll just walk around and get themselves into trouble. And what can we do about it?
So Janelle, I think, was going to respond to you around youth crime in our Black community and
Well, I can
incarceration.
respond on both counts. Do
Yeah.
you want to go ahead, Allison? I'm sorry.
Allison?
I was just going to mention, just in terms of the Indigenous community, that I'm not going to stay long, so you can go on, Janelle. I just wanted to say, Vera, there, when you ask why there's a problem, it's systemic. And it isn't about one thing, but we have to remember that this was a generation, the generation just below and the generations for many generations were taken away.
Residential school.
Residential school. And these children are the ones that we see now trying to parent, trying to be a community when it was taken from them. It was their language, their culture, their dress. And so there's some intersectionalities around, I worked for in Alberta, I worked for a service that our focus was on Indigenous and community. And as we started to do training and working together, there was such intersectionality in terms of similar stories between the Black people or people who call themselves Black and Indigenous story. And I know that there is a lot of work to be done, but again, it's not just about the people, it's about the systems that are wrapped or not wrapped around it. And I could go on about the politics of that, but I won't.
But you know what? Thank you very much, Allison, for presencing the residential school system and its legacy and just the untold intergenerational trauma that has wrought, that we are only just now learning about, thanks to a lot of the advocacy that's been done and all of the studies and the documenting, etc. Janelle.
So, I think that the two issues that Vera mentioned are linked, because what we're talking about is the genocide, the disenfranchisement, the theft of land, and the destruction of the humanity of people. We have had a parallel experience to the Indigenous people of this land. If you think about it, we are indigenous to Africa. And then we're separated from the continent by the system of enslavement. And then our land is taken through colonization. So there are Africans living on the land in Africa now who have the same experience of the indigenous people living on their land here. So quite simply, the reason why these two groups are statistically the highest incarcerated, statistically the highest numbers impoverished, the lowest rates of graduation and education, and then despite being highly educated, have lower rates of employment and leadership and all of those sorts of things, is because of the existence of colonial systems of oppression that date back into our history. And we're not even taught. I always tell this, that I took a whole course in high school, grade 12, on Egypt. Never did they mention the geography. It was located somewhere in the Middle East, not even naming Africa. So those kinds of things, we have to start telling the truth about the history. And so when I hear the stats and I understand the statistics about the number of Indigenous people who have parallel numbers and are at the same or worse outcomes than we have as Black community, I link it directly to what would it be like if you took away your way of life, your way of living, your culture, your language, your economic systems, replaced it with ones that work for you, and then disqualified you, everything about you from working within those systems, to where you have to code switch. You have to have this ability to be functioning in the colonial, and also questioning, who you are, and being told, well, who you are is not worthy, right? So I think there's a psychological damage that's done to both groups of people. There's the intergenerational trauma you talked about, that both groups of people are suffering from. And so when you see those outcomes, could you imagine this country had the two groups enslaved in this country are Indigenous and Africans. And so it's not a surprise, right? And I think we need to make those linkages and really understand what the work is that we are doing is about: the liberation and the preservation of the humanity of our people. For the Indigenous people, it's about their sovereignty and their right to have their land, and to develop their land, and to live off their land, and to have their land respected. And, they're so gracious right now, I think, to even tolerate the amount of times that we have reneged on the treaties, and they keep asking. And so, more grace, power, divine, they're so kind,
Yeah.
and I think that's the same with us. I think that's the same with us. We haven't gotten sufficiently upset about our oppression, and we blame ourselves. And we are like, when I think about it, when you think about it, when all of us are thinking about, think about pregnant women coming across for 8 months on a boat, and having their, I can't even say it's a boat, because it's not a cruise ship. Anyway, I don't want to get too far into that, except to say that I think they're linked. I think the outcomes that we're seeing, we have to go back and understand the truth of our history, and then come forward and not judge each other as, a failure to launch or a failure to adapt to colonial practices. We have lost so much. And so there's a reclaiming that has to happen. Thank you for the hearts.
Oh my God. I want to get up, and it's Sunday. I wanted to say hallelujah, because what you just said is so deep, and I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat that speak to, how people feel about what you just said. But okay, it's all well and good to be aware of the history, the changes, etc., etc. Solutions. So especially when it comes to the children and youth, what kinds of initiatives are you involved in that supports and empowers children?
Do you want me to handle
Ye-
that, or?
Uh, we'll come back to you. Maybe
Okay.
Allison, tell
Um,
us about the work you do to be part
um,
of the solution.
in part of the solution. So one of the pieces of work that I do, but I do want to mention something to Vera and the people in the room, is that if you want to know more about the Indigenous, the 21 things, the book, the 21 things you did not know about the Indian Act, is a really good start. It's a powerful book. And what Janelle said, that the crossover and the alliances that you see when you read that and understanding our history, and again, this idea, when we say his history, it's his history, and we need to be talking about our history. So thank you very much for that, Janelle. I'm involved in, I sit on a board of directors for Halton Black Voices, and we're really focused on really having a voice, and the goal would be to do what we've been doing there and put it in all our cities all over Canada. And it's just an opportunity to really, instead of asking the system to create the changes, we are starting to create those changes by doing the work that we need to do. So creating those galas, so to celebrate our Black brothers and sisters and our children, creating the homework clubs, bringing in the therapy in order to help and to merge them into and develop programs that support those children, those youth in the school. I think this comes with this idea around supporting from behind, coaching them from behind, not in front, but behind. But what we're learning is that we have to coach the parents first in order to coach the children. And we understand why. We understand the system. We've grown up in this system, and it's a hard system to kind of navigate and work with. And so one of the things that we are doing is really developing programs that support that learning for parents so that they can sit at the tables that they need to start to have voice in that. And so to create the changes to be the role model for their children in terms of advocating on their behalf, but giving them the tools, not asking them to do it without the tools, learning to give them the tools that allow them to be the person that their children want them to be, so that we can chart to change the next generation coming up, is one of the key things that the Halt to Black Voices really works on. And we're just getting into doing some research so that we can start to even impact even greater numbers in helping not just the youth that are in the schools and the children, but the teachers, but the systems. And now we have great partners in terms of the Catholic board out there, in terms of the region. And we're just saying that we feel that it's really important for us to actually take some agency in the change, that we can complain how it is, and it will be what it is because we live in a system. I always used to say racism is not located in the individual. Racism is in the fabric of our society. And so we are not going to change the society, but what we can do is change us. And then we can change other people around us by taking action. And one of them is our youth. Our youth are ready for change, and they are open for change. And so being part of that program, sitting on the board of that is something that allows me to feel that I'm creating change, even one city at a time.
Thanks for that. Janelle, youth in care, what kind of work are you doing to empower them, especially around the issues of homelessness and poverty?
Well, I think there's three things. One is we're encouraging people to do what they can at the individual level and within their families. So programs like mentorship and so on, I really think that the solution is about what we can come together and do. So it starts with us really making sure that we build those supports around as a community. So things like mentorship, things like tutoring, things like really opening our doors. I would encourage people to consider foster parenting and adoption, because within our system, if we're having disproportionate number of Black children and we're having not a lot of Black families signing up to be foster parents or to be adoptive parents, then these Black children are being raised in households where they're not necessarily being raised within their culture. And of course, we know that children need love most of all. But at some point, they're going to face an identity crisis if they're not exposed to, right? And they come up against this idea because I keep saying racism, we think it's about love, whether you like me and all that kind of stuff. I have lots of people that like me, but they're racist towards me because racism is not about love. It's an economic system, and it is designed to create the outcomes it's creating. So we need to get really wise about what that is. And on an individual level, there are things we can do, but particularly to child welfare, I would say it's bad. I think secondly, as a community, we need to build bridges. So there's so much that has been done to separate. Let's build bridges. So there's a tutorial program in Halton. There's a mentorship program there. We need to get together and talk about best practices. We need to get together and exchange resources. We need to recruit together. We need to do initiatives together and build bridges first with each other in our communities. So many organizations in our community that I have been a part of, either volunteering or consulting, working with, they fall apart over one little argument or something. We have so much to do. We have to really stay on mission and build those bridges. And then thirdly, I would say we have to address the point I've been bringing home all the time. It's like, I do believe that we can change, make big change, and we can transform the way society is organized, but we have to chip away at it bit by bit, and we have to understand how the systems come to bear. So we're looking for policy change. How will policy change impact the way we do things? Think about the opening, the wedge that has been opened up since George Floyd's murder, that has created diversity, equity, and inclusion all over the place. Now, say what you will about that. We need to use that opportunity to really ensure that we embed equity practices in everything. That's going to improve, that's going to lift all boats in a sense, And then, as I was saying before, I think one solution is to get at least the systems talking. So, if we can't get the heads of the hospitals, the heads of the school boards, and so on to talk to each other, then we as people working within the system have to start talking to each other and getting on the same page and working towards the same outcomes. So that's what I would say we need to work on.
Thanks for that. Vera, in another conversation we had, you were talking about the fact that there are other faith-based agencies other than the Salvation Army that support the homeless population. Tell us about your particular, the SDA community.
Okay. We have an agency called ADRA, and ADRA is an acronym for Adventist Disaster Relief Agency. It's a huge agency. It's worldwide. We get support from the government. So just like the Salvation Army, wherever there is a disaster or there is a war or the people need help, whatever the stage is, ADRA is there. The difference between ADRA, the work that ADRA does, and the Salvation Army is that when ADRA goes into a certain area and the people there don't have water, ADRA will take in water, but they also teach the people how to dig wells. And so then they learn how to dig wells, they have their water. If they don't have food, ADRA takes in food, and then they teach them agriculture, how to plant their own foods. Then they are sick. We go there with doctors and nurses from the organization. They treat the people, but they also build schools and they start to educate their own people. They build hospitals, they build schools. So you'll find, especially in Africa, we have a lot of schools from elementary right up. And even this part of the world, you can go from kindergarten right up to your PhD or your MD without stepping foot in a public school. But in those areas that I'm talking about in Africa, where the people don't have it, they go in and they will build schools, they build elementary school, they build colleges, they build universities and begin to train the people to be doctors, train them to be nurses, train them to be teachers. By the time ADRA comes out of that area, they left the people self-sufficient. That's because we have a worldwide work. Our organization has a worldwide work.
Well, in Canada specifically, though.
Yeah, in Canada, we do the same thing. In Canada, because right now in our church, I think it's Janelle who mentioned a tutoring program. We have a tutoring program where we get those who have skills in certain subjects. The children come, I think it's on a Sunday, sometime on a Sunday, and they do English, they do mathematics, they do science, they are taught and they're helped in school, because we do believe that education helps to alleviate poverty and homelessness. And sometimes children are going to school, some of them come up from the Caribbean and they come up here and they're taught a certain way. But when they come into the schools here, the way they are taught is different. And I remember someone made a joke and said, you tell a West Indian child, that is pot. They're looking for a pot that you're cooking. When they come to this country, they find out pot is drugs. They
Oh,
didn't know that back there,
hmm.
right? And so sometimes they give these aptitude tests and say the child has failed. The child has not failed. It's because of the language that they use is not a language that the child understands in the way Canadians understand it, right? So we do have a tutoring program. Now, I help young people from a different angle because I am a Christian. And I go spiritual because I believe that when you teach children the word of God and show them how to live the right way in a society, you're going to get better results. And a lot of the problems we're having with our young people is because they're out there, they were taught now that there is no God, and so they're not responsible to anybody, and they just do whatever they feel like. But because currently I have put a Bible study class on Zoom for children. And about 2 weeks ago, 8 of them were baptized because you have to teach these children from small. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he won't depart. They might go and play around a bit, but it's going to stay with them. They're going to come back to what they were taught.
But
Right?
in the interest of being inclusive, that can apply to other faiths as well. I have a lot of Muslim, I have a lot
It
of
can.
Muslim friends and some Jewish friends with the same concern
Yeah,
around spiritual grounding and
yeah,
making sure that that base
yeah,
as well is provided as well. But
yeah.
can we get now, as we come to the end of the conversation, the creative solutions? Let's say you're a parent, you're a single mom, you're a single dad. Suddenly you find yourself unhoused and you lost your job. You had to move somewhere with your children, and you just don't have the means to provide the way the children have been used to. What kind of creative ways can you help your children cope with such a situation?
So
Allison?
yeah, I was gonna just, yeah, that's a great question, Sarah. I think yeah, what would be helpful? I think consistency. So even though things are all over the place, and your children know there's consistency and there's honesty based on the child's age, of course. But I think that children know, they know that things are changed. Physically, they have to move home, or money's no longer available to do the things they used to. But there's something about being consistent. So if you're a family that has to move to different places in terms of being in a shelter, or you're in on the floor at a family's home, it's about making sure that you provide time to do something special with them every single day or every other day, because sometimes we think we have to do it every day for long periods of time, but no, our children just need us to do things that are consistent, so that we show up, so we continue to build that trust. And so even though they might be feeling anxious, they know that they can rely on something that's going to remain the same. We usually say that they should do something that they've been doing for a long time. So if they're used to going swimming, or they used to be go to the library to read, or they're used to going to walks, continue to do that with your child, because that will help them mentally and physically and emotionally, so that it has less impact, not only for them, but in the school when they're away from you, if you continue to do the things that they are used to. And it can be as simple preparing the same food that they like. It could be making sure you read to your child every night, even though it's on the floor and it's under a candle. It's about making sure that those things become sacred for that family, that they continue as they transition, hopefully, into a new home or a new space.
Love that. Janelle,
I think,
creative ways to help your kids, your young ones cope.
right. Well, I think Alison covered that pretty well, because it is about normalcy. It is about not allowing them to feel stigmatized or to feel the burden of that situation. But I think that I I would say that as people advocating and working on behalf of others who may be facing the situation, that we really have to have a good handle on the link between poverty and some of the things that we do, and the policy. Because, I can't, my mind is unable to focus simply on the things that we do, because I worked in the sector where it was food banks and uh, and temporary shelters, and millions of dollars invested in that. And I think we need to take responsibility for creating housing solutions. Transitional housing is helpful for, particularly, I know that would be helpful for the young people who are in care and the young people who are coming out of situations of incarceration. They need additional supports, because sometimes, even when you've been in that system and you're separated from family and you're spiritually lost, you don't have the skills that it takes, even if you had a place, to keep that place and to be a good neighbor, and all those kinds of things. So all of those little things, anything that we can do to normalize is helpful. I would say having having a response that takes the whole person into account. So, Vera is completely correct. I know she's coming at it from her own religious perspective, but all of us understand this is what she's talking about. The reason why we embrace every religion so completely is because when you get to understand who we are as Indigenous people, as African people, we understand the connection to the spiritual dimension. That's why it doesn't matter what practice we go into. You'll find a difference. I was raised Catholic. When I go into I went to the Catholic Church in Ghana, and I thought I was in a concert hall. The way we embrace the belief systems, whatever they are, we transform them, and we make them very good. Anyway, so this is an important part of who we are, the spirit. So we need to address our spiritual development. We need to address the hunger. We need to address the basic needs, the shelter, and so on. And I would be remiss if I did not make a case for basic income, right? We saw what happened.
Preach.
You saw what happened with Serve, right? Sure, the people who oppose this talk about the fact that, oh, people are just going to take this free money and do. But what the research has shown is, if you help someone with their education, if you help someone with their housing, if you help someone with their daily living, right, you are going to be helping them to get out of poverty. And so one of the things that we do at Children's Aid, and I know many other community organizations do as well, is we stop looking at poverty as a problem that the individual has. And we started looking at poverty as a situation that the individual is temporarily in, right? And so now we are looking at, okay, so I think before I came into the child welfare system, I'm told that if you were in poverty, then you could be deemed to be at risk, like the child is at risk for harm, right? So now we're asking a better question. Is the child coping? Is the family coping? Is the child actually experiencing a harmful experience? So the things that Allison's was talking about around normalizing the experience and so on, and helping the family to cope. Does the family just need a couple of $100 to make rent this month, and then they'll be able to stabilize the situation? That's not a reason to take the child away, right? Maybe that's a reason to hook them with a family, with a community organization that can help them get over that hump. So we need to work smarter, better, and those are the kinds of things. So diverting people away from homelessness by having these kind of solutions where, as I was talking about, we're bridging and we're coming together with the different systems. But we cannot do that. It's not the responsibility of organizations. We need to take back the responsibility to take care of each other as God's children, as human beings, however you want to look at it, as people sharing community together. We need to really get back to that.
And thanks for that, Janelle. And Michael Thompson has a question that kind of goes with what you're saying. He says we need to find ways to encourage the concept of each one reach one, the more privileged to foster, adopt, mentor, or sponsor those in need, an attitude of selflessness, empathy, and generosity. So, what role can you play in this? And I'm sure Vera has something to say about this.
Um, I was just thinking that poverty and homelessness, it creates increased stress on the parents. And if it's a single parent family, there is even more stress. And this stress then breaks down the relationship, and the children get caught in between. And so you have some of them run away from home, right? They go on the streets, or they go out and find other people who they think accept them, and they get into trouble, you know. However, I believe counseling, and not just any counselor. We need godly counseling. These children need godly counseling. The family on a whole need godly counseling to let them know that, right, you are, Janelle, it's a temporary situation, right? And if I can help in any way to help this child, because we have schools where you have to pay to go there, and if I can pay for your child to stay in that school rather than take the child out, I will pay for the child because I've seen it done. We are encouraging our organization to each one help one. If you can help that child in that way, why not? Instead of allowing the child to come out and go on the street, and you're buying things that you don't really need, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that we can help in that way with godly counseling. And also, we as Christians, we need to show what godly love is. I think that there's a lot of people who say, I'm concerned, but being concerned is not love, because you can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving. And so we need to be able to help each other, because we are all children of the Most High God, and we need to help each other along the way. What's killing us down here in this sinful world, is because of greed and selfishness and me, myself, and I. And if everyone would help each other, we would have less homelessness, less poverty, less marginalization, much less looking down on others because you think you are better than they are. I have a little saying that goes, whenever I look on someone sitting at the side of the road who look like they don't have, they will come and ask me for money and I will give them. I said that could have been me if it was not for the grace of God. That could have been me.
Yeah.
And if we all look at it that way, you'll find you have a different perspective on what it means to help others through their time, through their situation of hardship.
Hallelujah, Pastor. Yes. Seriously, but the grace of God go I. We should all have that mentality. And Sheila Pitt says building bridges and alliances with each other and trusting each other. There's the trust thing too. Are key to moving forward as a community. And we've lost the village.
Yes.
We're losing our way because we've lost the village of which all three of you speak, right? So, in closing, are there any closing comments, Allison?
Yeah, I just want to say, and it's to mirror this. So I have a social enterprise, a non-for-profit, and it was for entrepreneurial women to Black entrepreneurial women to come together, and all that was just to meet up, and with no effort from me, that platform went to 800, nearly 900 women within 6 months. So to me, that tells me there's a need, but we want it.
How did you do that?
Because I poured my heart out about what I needed as an entrepreneurial woman, and I put it on a meetup, and I said, wearing our invisible crown, Black entrepreneurial women wearing your invisible crown. And it grew. It grew without, in actual fact, I'll be honest, it grew, I was getting scared that my phone kept going bing, 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 at people onboarded onto the platform. Now, a lot of them are non-active, and I've removed them because we've been going for a year and a half. But let me tell you, there was a need, they leaned in. So someone had said in the thing about building bridges, we just need to start building the bridges because the want is there. I think we are changing. I think this generation wants to be connected. And they want something bigger than them, because I don't know, Harvard just finished a study and it said that the millennials are the fastest group going into religion than any other generation. And that tells you something, because they're moving from they're in that 30-something moving. And that tells you about the level of maturity and about the bigger picture. And that's how I want to leave it, that I do believe that we are not there, but we are on the right path. And I think that, as Janelle said, like coming in from a different level in terms of how we operate, I believe, you know, I'm informed by trauma informed. So you don't see the behavior, you see the trauma. And the indigenous people call it blood trauma. And I think that we have it as well, and we have to address it. And so, Vera, when you talk about therapy, absolutely, we need to lean into it. And we must remember, talk therapy was never it was never the way we healed. It was the drums. And the most I was trained under kind of the lead in the world of trauma informed on children's brains, and he kept saying, like, I didn't invent this stuff. We took it from you.
Yeah.
Took it from you. So anyway, I just want to leave that. I think we're moving in the right direction. We just need to start building the bridges, and we need to build them.
That's a nice, hopeful note. Janelle.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for that comment, because I was thinking the same thing, that we have been taught to think about our spirituality through a certain lens, and we created the way that we practice our faith. And so we need to understand that and get back to that. And so I want to leave with a challenge to, if you don't already know about, but to learn about Iwa Pele, which is, or Iwa Pele, I've been told that's the correct way to pronounce it. But it is one of the most beautiful spiritual principles that I have learned, that comes from the Yoruba culture. So remembering that all of our ways of practicing, worshiping, and appreciating our connection as humans and our connection to creation, to the divine creator, have been filtered through different lenses. And so part of my journey has been getting back to understanding that connection in a deep way from its roots, right, as to our people. So I put that challenge out. I think it's a great topic for another one of these fireside
Yes, I was just thinking that.
for us to talk about that. But all of that is connected. And I think the closer we get as a people to understanding our true selves and our role in all of that, I think our belief in ourselves will be restored. And everything I learned growing up was that everything I am given, I need to be able to amplify that, share it, be thankful for it, appreciate where it comes from, and understand that it is because I am a true child of God and expression of what we call God. Right?
Before I get Vera to have the last word, Allison, the book about the indigenous situation, 21
Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act by Bob Joseph.
Bob Joseph. Okay. Vera, the last word.
Yes, the Bible speaks about the Bible speaks about the poor you will always have with you. However, that does not mean that we should be indifferent to the plights of the poor. We should even focus more on it, because we are put here to help each other. First, let me say to parents out there, if you are out there and you are having a lot of stress and difficulty because of poverty and homelessness, some of them have have left home because of abuse and are in shelters with your children, please remember that there is a God who sees and knows what is happening. Do not walk out on your children, because God loves you and he loves your children. Don't walk out, because many people can't take the stress and they abandon their children. Don't ever do that. So what does the Bible say about the poor and the needy? Whoever oppresses a poor man insults his maker, but he who is generous to the needy honors him. That's Proverbs 14:31. It is better to be of a lowly spirit with the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud. Proverbs 16:19. Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. Proverbs 19:17. All three of us, Janelle, Allison, myself, Sarah, we are all here to help those who need our help. When we are generous to them, we are lending to the Lord, and the Lord is going to give back to us 100-fold. So let's keep on doing what we're doing so that this earth will be a better place for someone who comes in contact with us.
Amen and amen. And on that note, we will end this amazing thought-provoking conversation. We'll end it here, but hopefully this conversation continues out in the community. And thank you so much, Vera and Janelle and Allison, for all the work you do to support the people finding themselves in these situations, and what you do to empower them, and the advocacy you do to continue putting the spotlight on what still remains to be done. And thank you very much to our audience who tuned in for this conversation.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. One